Alfred Hitchcock is often described as a master of horror, a precise director who knows how to scare the audience and leave images and feelings in their hearts forever. Now, we have had countless horror masters who have graced the screen with their presence. Everyone from John Carpenter to Wes Craven have all taken from and adapted Alfred Hitchcock's interpretation of horror. What we will be looking at today is why Alfred Hitchcock understood horror and how his influence affects our horror movies even to this day. This is part 1 of a multiple video series, so please understand that I'm mostly going over Alfred Hitchcock's filmography in this video. Hitchcock began his career just like many other directors' careers, with films that flopped heavily in the commercial aspect, and in fact, many of his early films are just completely lost. His first thriller and commercial success would come with a film entitled The Lodger, a story of the London fog. This story, although told under a different made-up killer's name, was based around the killings of Jack the Ripper in London. This was his first big success, which then, 3 movies later, was The Man Who Knew Too Much and The 39 Steps. While neither one of these are explicitly horror, they did make Alfred Hitchcock a big name and would set him up for the future of his career. The way that Alfred Hitchcock was able to make a name for himself years before he was the #1 director in America and making the films he was most known for. He was able to show that while his career was not only commercially and critically successful, but also a long-lasting one, which is something not everyone gets to say. He moved on to create Suspicion, a film about a woman marrying a guy who she thought was a playboy who turns out to be a gambler and penniless and is trying to kill her. This is the first time that Cary Grant was in an Alfred Hitchcock movie. In 1943, after years of other films, he created Shadow of a Doubt about plotting the murder of someone on a train. Skipping over 5 years and 8 movies, Rope, the first movie Alfred Hitchcock shot that was entirely in color. It is also the movie he created that experimented with super long shots to help relay the story closer to being a stage play. In the 1950s, he made Strangers on a Train and Stage Fright, but one of his biggest movies would begin right after. Dial M for Murder features a woman who kills an assassin who was hired to murder her, and she is trying to not be executed. This movie is amazing, but next up becomes some of his most iconic and well-established films of all time. Rear Window was released in 1954, and features a sense of overlying paranoia, and it takes place almost entirely looking out the window of an apartment. This movie is almost entirely psychologically tormenting. In 1958, he released Vertigo. Again, a movie that is filled with thrilling moments and begins some of the classic Hitchcockian films. North by Northwest is released the following year and stars Cary Grant as he is pursued by some enemies who follow him around America and try to kill him. Psycho was released in 1916 and is quite often labeled as the beginning of modern horror. The way this movie was shot, written, and edited is what made this movie so good. The techniques and things this movie established are some of the foundations of horror movies. More on this later, but I'm going on to his next most famous movie, The Birds. To me, The Birds is sort of the beginning of the modern era of creature features like this. But I don't think it's necessarily a creature feature, even though the argument is definitely there. I do believe that it helped spawn the wave of movies about animals killing humans that would spawn later on, especially a movie like Jaws that would change the history of cinema forever. While some people dislike this movie, I'm going to just mention Frenzy as it was Alfred Hitchcock's final murder thriller. Now, unless you're an avid fan of the genre, it's possible that you have never seen the likes of Psycho before. Psycho really began the entirety of the modern-day slasher movie and is still considered to be the beginning of modern-day horror as a whole. Shot in black and white to save money because Alfred Hitchcock was not able to afford to pay for color film. This would not only prove to be a good financial move for the movie, but also visually and artistically the best choice. The overall tone and feeling of this movie would be much different had he chosen to go with color instead. The understanding that this movie was not going to be super bloody and instead focuses on his amazing quote, "The terror is not in the bang, only in the anticipation of it." This causes Alfred Hitchcock to use the camera and the dialogue to make the bang more intense, which is something that only the best horror directors do because it's something you eventually learn and grow into. Psycho was the original, and honestly one of the best slasher movies from the early years of the subgenre. I will be making a different video that goes into even further depth of the entirety of Psycho, because that is something that will be a very high research video, and I want to dedicate an entire video to it. While Alfred Hitchcock is someone whose genre understanding is almost unmatched, his influence is something you find on many genres. Alfred Hitchcock is an unprecedented influence on modern day horror and someone absolutely to study if you have any interest in film. I will be doing deeper dives into his big name horror later on in future videos, but for now, Thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram @/horror, and you can listen to my podcast on Apple Music and Spotify under /it. And like always, remember, treat every day like it's Halloween.